I fear for this institution. I fear for the state of Indiana, and I fear for all states if we allow intimidation and threats to become the norm. I've heard from Congress, and they say, but it is the norm, Greg. We get them every day. Well, shame on anyone that does that. And what has that done to the political climate? This is a political process, I've been told repeatedly. What has that done to the political climate in Washington, D.C.? Do we see a spirit of cooperation? Do we see a spirit of moving forward ideas that are nonpartisan issues? No one wants to give anyone an advantage. No one wants to give anyone the win. So we defeat and we fail to talk about the things that America desperately needs for Congress to do. They need to do their job. And they feel threatened and intimidated, and they don't do their job. What a disservice to Indiana. What a disservice to the nation and the 50 sister states that have agreed to a compact that says we will give certain powers to the federal government because we don't want to have our own standing armies and we don't want to do treaties with foreign nations. But when it comes to a point, we say, we stop here. Only the enumerated powers that are listed in our Constitution are by right the powers of the federal government. And I see nowhere in any of that they have a right to pick and choose legislative districts for Indiana or any other state. So I'm just going to ask you to consider your oath of office, the rules that you voted for. When you think about what do we do for the future of public debate and reasoned, well-considered, well-planned legislation that is there for the public to see. I already said in the preamble, those who signed the Constitution said, this is the government of the people. And if there's limited, or I would argue zero, opportunity for public participation in this process, then the preamble was written by men who put too much faith in future legislators. There was a topic that Senator Kadur touched on, which was the threats of intimidation, violence, or retribution. And we had testimony that brought to our attention that when we capitulate to that kind of act of threat, violence, retribution, not only on ourselves as legislators, but on the citizens that we represent in our communities, it got me to thinking about, I'm standing here holding our copy of our rules. Also contains our Constitution. But I want to go to our rules for just a moment. And I ask you to just bear with me, to let me build this case and see if I can make this point well. The standing rules and orders of the Senate were voted on by the legislators in this room. Chapter 7 begins with the ethics rules. Rule number 90 says that it's declared that high and moral ethical standards among state senators are essential to the conduct of free government. Free government. I don't think any of us ever enrolled or put our names on a ballot with the thought that we would be living under a time when we're being threatened for trying to execute our responsibilities to fulfill our office. That the Senate believes that a code of ethics for the guidance of state senators will help them avoid conflicts of interest in public office, will improve the standards of public service, and will promote and strengthen the faith and confidence of the people of Indiana. It's another one of my great concerns with the process that we're seeing before us today. It's clear from the testimony that for many, their faith and confidence is eroded by the mechanisms that we're going through at this time. why are you reading me the rules? I'm sure you're still trying to ponder. Why the ethics rule? I didn't bring this on myself. I didn't create this environment, and it's been mentioned multiple times that we're seeing the influence from outside of the state of Indiana that is motivating this to become a thing in the state of Indiana. But I, as a legislator, and you as legislators, are required to think about your own moral standards and your ethics as you deal with an untenable question before you. Now, the next rule, rule number 91, goes into the idea of having been offered an investment opportunity or some sort of economic advantage or some sort of favor or discount or gratuity or loan or hospitality or other goods and services with the intent that it might affect the senator's independent legislative judgment. And so considering, the senator shall take the following into account. Now, I have to make an analogy here because the rules did not anticipate the environment in which we're operating. I'm not going to call out by name the people in this room that I know have been threatened or an attempt to threat was made against their personal safety. I can say that I was one of those myself. Now, my local law enforcement did a beautiful job of not raising my blood pressure. We had a pleasant conversation at the front door of my home. I said, "Do you want to look through the house for the bodies?" And they said, "Oh, no, you're good. Don't see any blood, you're all right." But they had to follow up, and I apologized to the responding officer. You're wasting your resources being here when you could be out trying to protect our city from true harm. I had my own 911 director who I graduated high school with. Big kid in high school, still a big guy today. He's perfect for being in the sheriff's office because, man, he could scare anybody. And when I talk about people being big, okay, he's big. And he called me, and he said, "Look, I'm aware of the potential for threats. I've flagged you on our 911 system so that we'll handle this, internally before we, send all the noise and the full response to your property." And when he called me, it was actually organization day. I took the call while we were on the floor. And I said, "Oh, well, Todd, great. I appreciate that. I'm glad you took care of that." I had no thought at all that would be happening less than 48 hours later. First, I got the pizza delivery, which I refused. I didn't go to the door, actually. I didn't order a pizza. And I was pretty sure they got the address they were assigned to go to. And it had dawned on me that, someone wants to try to intimidate me. Now, why I have to draw the analogy is the rules say advantages. If in your judgment, these offers of advantagement, reward, compensation, favoritism, whatever it is, monetary services, doesn't matter. Do you know what the senator's supposed to do according to our rule book? Whether the opportunity being offered with the intent to influence the senator's conduct and the performance of legislative services. So I think that disadvantage that was offered to me of being threatened and feeling intimidated and feeling scared for my personal safety, I have to consider, does that influence the conduct or performance of my legislative office? But I also consider whether acceptance of the offer would have unique, direct, or substantial effect on my income. Well, that one doesn't count. Okay, so let's stick with the first in this analogy. We're almost there, believe me, bear with me. Should the senator determine that by the acceptance of the offer, and I'll use the idea of the offer of a threat, intimidation, or retribution against my district by withholding some sort of federal reimbursement or some sort of federal grant or some sort of funding opportunity that has a direct impact on the health and well-being of my community. So just consider this as a negative offer, okay? It's not a positive offer, because who in their right mind would have drafted rules to consider what we're experiencing today? But in the spirit of that offer, to feel my personal safety is at threat, If the senators to determine that by acceptance of the offer, the senator's independent judgment may be affected, the senator shall refuse the offer. That's a shall, and that's in our rules. And I refuse to be intimidated. I made a choice. I will not let Indiana or any state become subject to the threat of political violence in order to influence legislative product. I honestly don't feel fear for my safety. I really don't. I was more disappointed in not having the pizza than I was the swatting attempt. But if I do feel as though my personal, or and more important, we've had some members, and again, maybe in this room, who have children in their homes. And I can't imagine how my reaction would have been so much different when a law enforcement officer with his full chest Kevlar vest and so on, he's got to be protected, I understand that. But to a small child, that's scary. The rules say we shall refuse that offer. I fear that as we move down the road of exterior influences on my performance of duties in the state of Indiana, we are inviting, as we heard a testimony, that becomes the norm rather than the exception. I will not normalize that kind of behavior. And I feel like whether the maps are a good idea or a bad idea, the idea or the concept of the maps did not originate with any legislator or citizens' body that I'm aware of anywhere in the state of Indiana. So I wanted to bring to your attention and build on Senator Cadua's point that I have a duty. I'm such a rule follower, it's not even funny. One of the earliest jobs I took that was of a professional nature, they did a psychological profile, and they said, man, this guy follows the rules. I had a controller who said, I'm so glad I hired you, Walker. He said, I don't have to worry about things anymore because I hired you to worry about them for me. I was so sure and just particular that we followed the rules. And I was working in tax filing, and I was working with multiple states, and it was millions of dollars in penalties. Not the tax, but in penalties if I messed these tax returns up. And he said, I used to worry about these things. He said, you do it for me. I'm grateful you're here because I sleep better at night. I wasn't going to tell this story. I held a small baby last night. I think she's about 5-6 months old now. And her mother had her in her arms and she was asleep, and she's gorgeous, the baby, I mean. And she said, can I give you a hug? And I said, no, I want the baby. And I said, would you give her to me? And I've held her before. And she said, yeah, hold her. And I began to cry as I thought about the future for that child, where we accept that intimidation is normal. Our rules can't even address it appropriately, but I think you understand the analogy I drew. And I shall refuse the offer for the sake of that child and the future of the state. And you're thinking, oh, it's easy. You already said you're not coming back. You can't be primaried. Well, some little seed in the back of my head says, go ahead and file. I think it'd be the dumbest thing I ever did in my life, but that's what my wife thought when I ran 20 years ago. This is the stupidest thing you've ever done. And you're going to destroy her family. And I said, oh, it'll be okay. She went and talked to me for 2 weeks. She became one of my greatest supporters. Because she said, there's no reason you should be up there. I can't understand it. The political path that you took does not explain how it is you became a senator or how I've held the seat for 20 years. So she says, I know you have a purpose. And I feel like today is that purpose. I may be wrong. All I got to work with is what I can read in the plain English of the documents before me. I still have, I heard a testimony regarding a few of the constitutional concerns that people have. And we don't have enough attorneys in the room to settle that today. But there is one more that no one's even mentioned, that I cannot see how the bill that's before us can satisfy that constitutional requirement. I'm not going to be able to convince you that because there are attorneys on both sides, but I have the advantage of being the non-attorney, right? And I can read plain English and I can understand what it says. So if I have come to my personal conviction that this is in violation of the Constitution and the bill cannot right itself by some of the machinations that are in the language to try to do that, because I think the drafters also know of the unconstitutionality of their position. Not reflecting on anyone in this room, I said the drafters, and I understand and appreciate the great weight that Mr. Chairman has in agreeing to carry this bill. There's just one more principle I want to touch on, and that is that of intent. And as I said, I can read that language and I can understand the intent. I don't see any room for wiggle. But what I've heard is, but it doesn't say we can't redistrict midterm. I still believe that's true because intent will be examined by a courtroom when I'm assuming in the future, here's some testimony regarding the validity or the legality of this bill. It's not just what we say. The courts have already made that determination. I can say all day long, this is just that. But if there's evidence to the contrary that could be brought before the court, no matter how many times I say it, this doesn't have to be that in a court of law, right? So I cannot in good conscience support this bill going forward. I have been public since August with my position on this, and I got people that hate my guts that say, well, at least you don't play games with us, Walker. You know, you tell us where you are, and we respect that. We hate everything else about you, but we respect that. And there's others in this body that have kept that to themselves, and I respect that too. I respect that greatly. And you can hold and wait and say that there may be a better argument that helps me make up my mind. That's what we're here for. That's what we're supposed to be doing in committee. I still think committee work is undervalued, Mr. Chair, in that we don't see a free exchange of ideas. And I think if we did better committee work as a 20-year member, we would have a lot less confusion and frustration on the floor. That's my personal opinion. So if I don't want to see this bill on the floor because I don't think it's written correctly or can be written correctly to deal with the policy that's being promulgated, then I have to vote no in committee if I think it's a no on the floor. But I'd really ask you to focus really on your understanding of the rules of ethics, ladies and gentlemen, my brothers and sisters, because that's your call. It's subject to interpretation. And I believe that our rules give us strong guidance on what to do when the unexpected has now happened. I believe that the intent with which we wrote those rules to say it is a matter of public integrity that if you think your position is compromised by a gift, a gratuity, a special offer, it could equally be compromised by a threat, an intimidation, or taking away of that which you already have, or your constituents have and need. I appreciate you giving me some attention tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh.
just want to briefly say that Senator Walker and I couldn't be further apart on the way we view this issue, but we serve the same Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and we have remained friends throughout this, and we will be friends after it. And that's the second time that I've given him a hug today. I think, well, he gave me the first one, so I initiated that one. Thank you for sharing your heart with us.